My name's Gale Ekiss. I'm the co-coordinator of the Arizona Geographic Alliance, and today I'm going to share a lesson called Migration, Push and Pull Factors. This lesson is for high school and for 7th grade. However, I have seen it successfully used with almost every grade level that there is. Overview. Throughout our lives, we'll be making decisions about moving to a different part of town, a new city, a state, or even maybe leaving our nation. And this activity will focus on the reasoning that people go through in order to make a migration. The purpose of this lesson is that students will better understand the geographic terms of push and pull, and then they will apply these to their own family history. Materials. You're going to need a series of worksheets. You're going to need a map, and I'm going to direct you to a map that's on the table right now. This particular map I call a disposable map. And by disposable map, I mean that it is a print off the computer and throw it away kind of map. Now, if I was to use a National Geographic map of the United States, I would pay at least $10, maybe up to $20 for a United States map. However, on our website, we have these maps made that you can just print off. They're 9 sheets of Xerox paper that you print on your color printer. Then you put them together with Scotch tape, and then you have a large enough size map that you can do a classroom activity with. And then, as I said, when it's done, you wad it up, throw it away, and you haven't really spent a lot of money creating this map. And then you're going to need some sticky dots. And there are a couple of varieties. I like this smaller size sticky dot to use on this particular map, but it's up to you. If you would rather have the large dots and put them on the map, that also will work. But the small ones, and you need 3 different colors of sticky dots. Or if it's a disposal map and you want to just mark it with markers, you can just take your marker and you can do the same thing by putting dots on the map. All right, the objectives of the lesson is students will be able to define the terms push and pull. They'll be able to identify push and pull factors. They will analyze their own push and pull factors in terms of their families and themselves, and they'll be working with a Venn diagram to produce a writing. Prior to this lesson, you need to send home a worksheet called Where Were You Born? Now, the point of the worksheet is to get classroom involvement. And it asks for where they were born, which most students would know, but they may not know where their parents were born or their grandparents were born. So you need to send it home a week or so ahead of time, have it come back on a certain day. Now, we know that all families aren't traditional, so you have to be very receptive to whatever they want to put down. They may want to use a stepdad, they may want to use foster parents, it doesn't really matter. The point is, let's have some activity within the classroom, so encourage them to get it filled in and to do the research ahead of time. On the day that you're going to do this lesson, then you introduce the session with using that worksheet called Where Were You Born? And that for the first round, we're going to have everybody use a sticky dot to mark on the map where they were born. So let's say, for example, we have our students choose red. Okay, red is the color for themselves. And so I have this map that's done here that shows you red dots. This is where these students were born. Okay, and we have varieties of red dots all over. Now I will explain by using my map here. This particular map was done by adults. And it was done by a group of teachers in Tucson. So we have a little skewed analysis here because these are people that are 20 years old to 60 years old and not 12-year-olds. Because if I was doing this with 12-year-olds, I'd probably have almost all of them in Arizona and then a few scattered around. So the first step is to have them put their dots on the map. And then the point of geography is to look for spatial patterns. So what pattern do we see by looking at the red dots? Do we see any pattern at all? Well, one pattern that came to me was that there aren't very many red dots in our northwestern part of our nation, and there aren't any red dots in our southeastern part of the United States. That's just something I noticed. I don't have an answer for it, but for some reason, none of these adults seem to come from those two parts of our nation. The second step is that you now give them a different color red dot, and in this case, we're going to give the parents blue dots, and they are going to put blue dots on the map for where their parents were born. So you can see we have about an equal number of blue dots to red dots in Arizona. And you can see where there's a red dot, there's usually a blue dot. So these people, these adults, were pretty much where they were born is where their parents were born, is one pattern that I can see. But again, we have very few in the South, and we have very few in the Pacific Northwest. The third step is that we're going to use another color of sticky dot. In this case, we're going to use yellow for grandparents. And we're going to have them put on the map where their grandparents were born. Now is when this particular map gets kind of interesting, because as we look at the yellow dots, look at how many we have off of the map. And that's one of the things that happens. You're going to see even on the slide for the PowerPoint, I've written some countries kind of just off in the world there. That's because as we start extending from themselves, we often find that our parents or grandparents were born in another country. So we have quite a few that were born in Mexico, quite a few that were born in Europe. We have Switzerland, Germany, Italy, Belgium, Sweden, Netherlands, Finland. And then we have some born in the Caribbean, Jamaica, St. Kitts, Trinidad. And then we have some more European ones here, Ireland, Czechoslovakia, Scotland, England. So as we look at this map, we can start to see some spatial patterning. Ourselves in one place, our parents maybe a small bit out. But as we go to grandparents, it starts to blossom into what an international nation we might be. Then we had the question that was on the Where Were You Born worksheet that dealt with what year did your parents or grandparents, whoever came to Arizona first, what year did they come to Arizona first? And that's an interesting question, because one of the things that I experienced in my classroom was we had a lot of Native American students who said forever. And for them it was forever. It's been centuries and centuries and centuries that their families have resided in Arizona. But for many of us, it's not a forever. It's maybe they came in the 50s, maybe they came in the 60s, maybe they came in the 70s, 80s, maybe they just came last week. So it's an interesting discussion point for Arizona. And then you can talk about, why did they move here? Again, what was the pull to come to Arizona? And then you're going to end the day with the students writing in their social studies journal or doing a ticket out the door, where they need to write down 2 patterns they observed from when they did this large classroom map. The next day, or session 2, you're going to introduce the lesson by a show of hands of who's moved once, who's moved twice, who's 2 and 3 times. And eventually you're going to have some kid that still has his hand up, and you can ask him, how many times have you moved? And the child might say 6 or whatever. But the important part of this is not who's moved the most. It's not like there's a winner. But the discussion is to revolve around, how is it difficult to move so many times? But what's the benefit of moving so many times? And get them into a discussion. So how is it difficult to move all these times? They can be talking about, well, you have to learn new friends, you have new schools, you have to get a new place to live, maybe you had to leave things behind, you couldn't take all the toys, you couldn't take all the clothes. And what's the benefit of moving many times? Now, often 12-year-olds don't have any benefit. They don't know why it's going to be good for them to have moved. But as they get older, people will often cite, well, I got to learn about different parts of the country. I got to learn maybe a different language. I got to learn about different foods. I met lots of people that I now keep in contact with and I still can visit. So there are some benefits to moving, but sometimes when you're 12, you just don't see it. Then you're going to distribute the push and pull factors, and you're going to have the students answer the following questions. List all the places they've lived, and hopefully they've lived several places, but sometimes not. Sometimes they're still in that same house they were born in. And then the push reasons for why a person left or their family left that place, and what were the pull factors to the new place. And then we want to talk about what are the pull factors to move to our state in Arizona, and why do people, or if you could live anywhere, where would you live? It's always a really interesting question. What are kids thinking about when they're going to pick the perfect place to live? So you want to engage them in some conversation here. What are reasons that people move to Arizona? And they come up with, well, there's family reasons, there's grandparents and whatever. But don't go too far into that discussion, because you're going to be doing virtually about the same thing with the Venn diagram. So the Venn diagram is now where we can put our answers for why do people move to the United States, and why do people move within the United States, and we can start looking at some possible answers. Some of the reasons that people move to the United States have to do with perhaps getting jobs, to go to school. Sometimes it's for health care. Maybe they perceive the United States having better health care systems than where they're from. One of the answers I get quite often is freedom. And you kind of have to tap that a little bit, because, freedom was true. That's one of the things we teach them about why the Pilgrims came, or why these people came years ago, 100 years ago and stuff. But there are still people who do come for freedoms. Maybe they're in a land that there's warfare, or maybe they're in a land where their particular kind of person is not valued, and so they feel they need to flee. So there still are people who come for freedom, but it's not quite that story of immigration from years before. They come because of family. They come because of safety issues like freedom from war or persecution. But moving within the United States, that's another interesting matter, because not all of those factors fit. Some do, but some don't. Jobs certainly fit. Health reasons might fit. Okay? But because there's no snow, that is, I don't know how many people come to the United States because there's no snow. Maybe if they live in Siberia or northern Canada or something. But for the most part, they don't, you don't move within the United States, or you don't come to the United States because there's no snow and choose to live here for a long period of time. Family, definitely. Housing, lifestyle, safety, those all could be issues to move within the United States. But what you want them to do then is to look for commonalities and put those in the center of the Venn diagram. Now, the next part of the worksheet deals with a personal migration. Now we're going to have students, and chances are I would start with the North American one, but if they've never moved from the ones, the house they've always lived in, they really don't have much of a story to tell. So they get the Arizona map, and they get to put a dot on the Arizona map, and they mark the city that they live in. But for those kids who have moved, they can now trace a personal migration. And so you want them to start with where they were born. Let's say they were born in Texas, and that would be number one. And then they're going to move to, let's say mom and dad decided to move to Florida. That's number two. And then they move to Pennsylvania, and that's number three. And then finally they come to Arizona, and that's number four. So you want them to do a journey. Some of them have moved out of country. Okay? They went to Hawaii for a year. And with kids, you always need to kind of set a time limit, because they want to count vacations to Disneyland or visiting grandma as a move. So you kind of have to say, okay, you were there for 6 months or more, or give them some time period so that they're not just tracking vacations and other things, because migration really means moving for a permanent reason, not just a visit. All right, and you're going to conclude with writing an essay, what they think is the most important push or pull factor in terms of migration. And in other words, they're going to talk about what causes most people to move. And so they must pick an answer. Is it family? Is it jobs? Is it housing? Is it safety? And then they have to support these with their facts. All right, for an assessment, students can, their journal writings or their tickets out the door can be graded for completeness. The Venn diagram can be graded for correctness, and their writing can definitely be graded with the 6-trait writing rubric. And the final assessment to define and give examples of a push and pull factor can be graded, and then you have definitions worth so much and examples that are worth so much. And extensions. The map of the classroom that we did, with the big map that I had where I showed where all of these people were born, where their parents were born, and where their grandparents were born, makes a wonderful bulletin board display. So you can put it on the board, and then they can label either this is me, this is .me, or they could put their picture on the board with a piece of yarn or string or something going to their birthplace. And it makes a great open house bulletin board at the beginning of the year for the children to walk in the door and show their parents the map and say, here's your dot, and here's grandma's dot, etc. And then the mapping activity can be done with the whole student body of the school. If you really want to see where your school is from, you could map the whole school, use removable dots, and then have a large map and use it as a cafeteria display.